My name is Alex, and this happened 3 years ago when I was living alone in an apartment complex outside Chicago. The complex wasn't particularly nice, but it wasn't dangerous either. Beige carpet in the hallways, buzzing fluorescent lights, the kind of place where you learn to recognize your neighbors by the sound of their footsteps before you ever learned their names. I'd lived there for almost 2 years and knew most of my neighbors by sight. My apartment was on the fourth floor. The building had a long indoor hallway with units on both sides, doors evenly spaced like teeth. The carpet worn thin down the middle where 2 years of feet had passed back and forth. Every night after work, I'd take the elevator up, unlock my door, and spend the rest of the evening inside. It was a routine I followed almost every day. I never thought about it. Routines like that don't ask to be noticed, they just are. Until the night they stop being safe. One night, around 11 p.m., I came home later than usual. The elevator doors opened with their usual metallic groan. As I stepped out, I immediately noticed something strange. The hallway smelled like cigarette smoke. That wasn't unusual by itself. A few tenants smoked out their windows, and sometimes it drifted into the hall. The strange part was where it was coming from. My neighbor across the hall was standing outside his apartment, just standing there. He wasn't smoking. There was no cigarette in his hand, no lighter, no pack. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't doing anything at all. He was simply facing his own door, motionless. I want to be clear about how still he was, not the stillness of someone waiting for a call, shifting their weight, checking a watch. It was the stillness of a photograph, like someone had paused him mid-frame and forgotten to press play. As I walked toward my apartment, I gave him a quick nod, the kind you give a stranger to avoid the discomfort of not acknowledging them at all. He didn't react, not a flicker, not a turn of the head, nothing. I remember thinking he must have been drunk, or maybe locked out, embarrassed, waiting for a roommate to let him in. I unlocked my door and went inside, and for a moment I stood with my back against it, listening. I don't know what I expected to hear. Nothing came. About an hour later, I took out the trash. I told myself I wasn't checking on him. I was just taking out the trash. When I stepped back into the hallway, he was still there. Same position, facing his door, not moving. The cigarette smell was stronger now, thick enough that it caught in the back of my throat, though there was still no cigarette anywhere in sight. I felt uncomfortable enough that I avoided eye contact and went back inside, walking a little faster than I needed to, telling myself I wasn't walking faster at all. The next morning, he was gone. The hallway was ordinary again. Sunlight coming through the window at the far end. Someone's radio playing faintly behind a door. I forgot about it, the way you forget about most strange things in daylight. A few weeks later, I came home late again. This time, it was almost midnight. The moment the elevator doors opened, my stomach dropped before I even understood why. The same neighbor was standing in the hallway. Again, motionless, facing his apartment door. Exactly where he'd been before, down to the angle of his shoulders, like he'd never left. I walked past him, closer this time than I meant to, close enough to smell that smoke again, sharp and stale. As I did, I glanced at his face. His eyes were closed. I stopped. For a second, I thought he might be asleep standing up, some strange parasomnia, a night terror caught mid-episode. Then I noticed something else. His apartment door was slightly open, only an inch or two, just enough to create a thin black gap, darker than it should have been, like the space behind it wasn't quite a room anymore. I quickly looked away and went inside my apartment, locking both the deadbolt and the chain, which I never usually bothered with. The entire situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Not dangerous exactly. Wrong, the way a word looks wrong if you stare at it too long. I told myself it wasn't my business. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe he was intoxicated. Maybe he had some kind of medical condition, Something neurological. Something with a name and a doctor and a simple explanation. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I knocked on his door. Nobody answered. I knocked again, waited, pressed my ear near the frame without quite touching it. Silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the specific, heavy silence of something holding still on the other side. I never saw him again after that. A month passed, then another. I stopped thinking about the hallway at 11 p.m. I stopped thinking about the smoke. Eventually, a moving company showed up and emptied his apartment. I watched from my window as they carried out a couch, a mattress, a few boxes, nothing that seemed disturbed or unusual. I assumed he'd moved out. Life went back to normal. Then one Friday night, something happened that I still can't explain. I woke up around 3 a.m. At first I didn't know why. My room was dark, my apartment was silent, and for a moment I lay there certain it had just been a dream pulling me up out of sleep. Then I heard it, a knock. 3 slow knocks coming from my front door. I checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. Another knock. I got out of bed and walked quietly toward the door. My heart beat suddenly very loud in my own ears. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. The hallway was empty, stretched out under the fluorescent light in that flat, sterile way empty hallways always are at 3 a.m., like a stage after the actors have gone home. I waited. Nothing. Feeling annoyed, telling myself it was a prank. Some drunk neighbor with a bad sense of humor. I went back to bed. A few minutes later, the knocking returned. 3 slow knocks. The same rhythm exactly. Spaced too evenly to be careless. Too deliberate to be random. I checked the peephole again. Still nobody. This happened 4 more times. Each time, the same 3 knocks. Each time, the same empty hallway. I started counting the seconds between them without meaning to. My whole body tensed toward the door like it was waiting for permission to be afraid. Eventually, I became convinced someone was playing a prank. Someone fast enough to knock and duck out of frame before I reached the peephole. Anger overtook the fear, just barely. I opened the door. The hallway was empty, completely empty. No footsteps retreating. No door easing shut somewhere down the row. Just silence and the hum of the lights. Then I noticed something on the floor, a folded piece of paper, resting right at the threshold, as if it had been placed there and not dropped. My name was written on it, not typed. Handwriting I didn't recognize, small and careful, the letters pressed hard into the paper. I picked it up and carried it inside, my hands not quite steady, and shut the door behind me before I let myself unfold it. The note contained only one sentence.
Don't look through the peephole again.
I felt my chest tighten. I read it twice, 3 times, as if rereading it might change what it said. I checked the hallway one more time. Nobody. I locked the door and called the police. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later, flashlight in hand, radio murmuring low on his shoulder. He searched the building, floor by floor, checking stairwells, the laundry room, the fire exit at the end of the hall. Nothing. No suspects. No cameras had captured anyone near my apartment. Not in the hallway, not in the stairwell, not on the street outside. The officer suggested one of my neighbors was messing with me, some elaborate joke gone too far. I wanted to believe him. Before leaving, he asked to see the note. The moment he read it, his expression changed. Something behind his eyes shifted, some professional calm, slipping for just a second before he caught it again. He asked me a question. Have you ever had problems with the tenant who used to live across from you? I told him no. I told him I barely knew the man, that I'd only ever seen him in passing. The officer became very quiet. He looked back down at the note, then at my door, then at the hallway behind him, like he was measuring distances he didn't like the answer to. Then he explained something. The neighbor I kept seeing in the hallway hadn't moved out. He had died. Months earlier, Inside his apartment, the body wasn't discovered for nearly 2 weeks. Nobody had noticed. No one had knocked. No one had smelled anything through the door until it was too late to ignore. According to the report, he had been found standing near his front door, facing it. Not collapsed, not lying down. Upright, leaned into the doorframe like he died mid-motion, reaching for something on the other side that was never there. The position had initially confused investigators. There was no clear medical explanation for how a body stayed upright like that, undisturbed, for 2 weeks. I remember feeling cold all over. A cold that started in my chest and spread down through my arms until my fingers felt distant and numb. Then I asked the officer something. If he died months ago, who was I seeing in the hallway? The officer didn't answer. He just handed the note back, and I noticed his hand wasn't quite steady either. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was writing on the back, very faint writing, as if someone had pressed a pen against another sheet of paper, resting on top of this one. Hard enough to leave an impression, but not a mark. I held it under the light, tilting it back and forth until the indentations caught the glow just right. It took me several seconds to make out the words. When I finally did, I nearly dropped it. It said,
Because it's looking back.
I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I told my landlord it was for work. I didn't tell him about the knocking, which continued 3 more nights, always at 3:07. Always 3 slow knocks, always an empty hallway waiting on the other side of the peephole. I stopped answering. I stopped checking. I lay in bed and counted the knocks and told myself that not looking was the same as it not being real. But before I left, curiosity got the better of me one final time. I checked the peephole at exactly 3:07 a.m. The hallway looked empty. For a moment, I felt relieved, a full breath of it, my shoulders dropping for the first time in weeks. Then I realized something. The hallway wasn't empty. Someone was standing directly against my door, so close that the peephole couldn't see them. The fisheye glass showing only a smear of shadow where a person's chest would have to be. Close enough that I understood, all at once, that they had been standing there the entire time I'd been looking for them somewhere else. And that's why I've never looked through another peephole since.